You noticed it again tonight. A sound from somewhere in the house, folding into something else. A smell you couldn't quite name, pulling you back toward a moment you'd forgotten. Your senses reached before you did. What science has been finding for decades is this. The senses don't report the world. They construct it. Every signal that enters your eyes or ears or skin arrives as raw electrical noise. And somewhere between the nerve and the thought, your brain turns that noise into an experience so seamless you never catch the seam. And here is what most people miss. The version of the world your senses hand you is always slightly behind, slightly adjusted. Built on a guess your nervous system made a fraction of a second ago. Welcome to Sleepy Science. That gap between the signal and the experience is where tonight begins. Close your eyes and breathe. You are already inside the gap, the space between what arrives and what you feel. And now we begin. Your senses never give you the world directly. Every sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell you have ever experienced was a reconstruction. A model your brain built from electrical impulses traveling along nerve fibers. The world your brain hands you feels immediate and real. But it is always an interpretation, not a recording. Neuroscientists call this predictive processing. The brain doesn't wait for all the data to arrive before deciding what you're perceiving. It generates a best guess in advance and then updates it with incoming signals. The raw data, photon, air pressure waves, chemical molecules, has no color, no sound, no warmth on its own. Those qualities exist entirely inside the nervous system. The apple isn't red. Your brain decided it was. The human eye sends roughly 1 million nerve fibers to the brain. But vision scientists estimate that only a minority of the visual cortex's input comes from the eyes themselves. The rest comes from other brain regions. Memory, expectation, context, and prior experience. What you see is mostly a prediction that incoming light either confirms or gently corrects. This is why optical illusions persist even when you know the trick. Your brain has committed to its model, and a simple explanation doesn't override it. The lines that look different lengths stay looking different lengths. The brain chose its interpretation before you learn to question it. Sound reaches your two ears at slightly different times, and the gap between those arrivals is measured in microseconds, millionths of a second. Yet the auditory system uses those tiny differences to locate a sound in three-dimensional space with fine precision. The interaural time difference for a sound directly to the side is about 630 microseconds. The brain detects differences as small as 10 microseconds, a resolution finer than the width of a human hair in timing. This spatial hearing developed long before language, and it still runs continuously, even during sleep, flagging changes in sound location before you become consciously aware of them. Touch is not one sense, but at least 5 distinct systems operating in parallel. Mechanoreceptors detect pressure, vibration, and stretch. Thermoceptors track temperature. Nociceptors respond to potential damage. Proprioceptors register the position of your limbs in space. And a recently better understood class of nerve fibers, C-tactile afferents, responds specifically to gentle, stroking contact at skin temperature, and seems to communicate social touch, warmth, and calm rather than information about objects. These see tactile fibers project to the insular cortex, a region associated with interoception, the felt sense of the body's internal state. A slow, gentle touch activates a circuit that evolved for comfort. Your nervous system already knows the difference. The tongue contains between 2,000 and 10,000 taste buds, each lasting only about 10 days before being replaced. But taste, the experience of flavor, requires far more than taste buds. It requires smell. Roughly 80% of what we call flavor is actually olfactory information, arriving through the back of the throat as you chew. When you hold your nose and eat, the food becomes nearly flavorless. This multi-sensory construction of flavor is so complete that color can override it. In studies where white wine was tinted red with an odorless dye, trained wine experts described it using the language of red wine. The color changed what they tasted. The vestibular system, the sense of balance and spatial orientation, lives inside each inner ear as 3 fluid-filled canals arranged at right angles to each other. As the head moves, fluid shifts and bends tiny hair cells, and the pattern of bending tells the brain the direction and speed of rotation in all 3 planes of space. This system operates largely below conscious awareness, continuously updating the brain's model of the body's position. When it conflicts with vision, as happens in some forms of motion sickness, the brain receives 2 contradictory signals and sometimes interprets the mismatch as poison, triggering nausea. The body trying to protect you from a signal disagreement you never asked for. Humans have at least 33 distinct types of smell receptors, and the combination of signals from those receptors allows the recognition of an extraordinary number of distinct odors. Some studies estimate roughly 1 trillion, a number that cannot be meaningfully compared to anything in ordinary experience. Yet smell is the sense most tightly connected to memory and emotion. The olfactory bulb projects directly to the amygdala and hippocampus without the relay through the thalamus that vision and hearing require. This anatomical shortcut means smell reaches emotional memory faster and more directly than any other sense, which is why a scent can return you to a moment with a fullness that a photograph cannot match. The skin is the body's largest sensory organ, covering roughly 21 square feet in an adult and containing several million individual sensory receptors. But sensitivity is not evenly distributed. The fingertips can resolve 2 points of contact as little as 2 millimeters apart. The back can only distinguish 2 points 40 to 70 millimeters apart. This difference reflects the density of sensory neurons and the relative size of the brain area devoted to processing each region. A map called the somatosensory cortex, where the hands and face take up disproportionately large territories compared to the torso. The brain invests resources in proportion to what matters most for fine interaction with the world. The brain does not process sensory information 1 channel at a time. It integrates it continuously, and when the channels conflict, it resolves the conflict in ways that can override what any single sense reports. The McGurk effect demonstrates this. When the lip movements of one syllable are paired with the sound of a different syllable, most people hear a third syllable that neither matches what they see nor what they hear. The brain builds a compromise. This multisensory integration is not a quirk. It is the normal operating mode. What you experience is always the product of negotiation between senses, not the direct report of any one of them. Every sensory signal your nervous system receives is processed with a timestamp. But the timestamps don't always agree. Light travels faster than sound, yet we experience a person's lips and voice as synchronized at short distances. The brain actively recalibrates the timing of sensory signals to make them feel simultaneous when they occur within a window of roughly 100 milliseconds. This temporal binding creates the smooth, unified moment of experience out of what is physically a cascade of asynchronous signals. The world you experience is not just spatially constructed, but temporally stitched together, moment by moment, from signals arriving at slightly different times in a darkness that never shows you its work. Pain is perhaps the most counterintuitive of the senses, because it is not simply the detection of damage. It is a decision. The nervous system weighs incoming tissue damage signals against context, expectation, attention, and emotional state, and then generates a pain experience calibrated to motivate protective action in the current situation. This is why the same injury hurts differently, depending on whether it happens in a threatening or safe environment, whether you are anxious or calm, whether you are paying attention to it or distracted. Phantom limb pain. Pain experienced in a limb that no longer exists demonstrates that the pain experience can be generated entirely within the nervous system, independent of its origin point. The auditory cortex is organized tonotopically. Different frequencies are processed in different physical locations along the cortex, laid out in a gradient from low tones at one end to high tones at the other. This arrangement mirrors the physical structure of the cochlea inside the inner ear, where different hair cells vibrate in response to different frequencies. The brain preserves the spatial map of the peripheral organ all the way to the cortex. And when you listen to music, the activation sweeps across this map in patterns that correspond to the frequency content of what you hear. The architecture of the brain carries the shape of sound. Color is not a property of objects. It is a property of nervous systems. Photons have wavelengths, but wavelengths have no color. The experience of redness arises when photons in a wavelength range around 700 nanometers stimulate the long wavelength cone cells in the retina more than the medium or short wavelength cones, and the resulting pattern of activation is interpreted by the visual cortex as red. Different species have different numbers and types of cones, and therefore experience color differently. Mantis shrimp have 16 types of photoreceptors compared to our 3. It's unclear they see more colors. They may simply process color information more rapidly. More receptors don't necessarily mean richer experience. The sense of proprioception, knowing where your body parts are without looking, operates through receptors embedded in muscles, tendons, and joints that detect stretch and tension and send continuous signals to the cerebellum and motor cortex. Close your eyes and touch your fingertips together. The precision of this requires a continuous, real-time map of limb position that never fully turns off. After certain neurological injuries that damage proprioceptive pathways while leaving muscle strength intact, patients can no longer walk without watching their feet, because the unconscious positioning system that normally runs in the background has gone quiet. Most of the body's work is invisible until it disappears. The skin can detect temperature changes of as little as 0.02 degrees Celsius under optimal conditions, a sensitivity comparable to the most precise laboratory thermometers available in earlier eras. But thermoception is not a simple gradient detector. The same receptors that detect warmth in the skin can be activated by certain chemical compounds. Capsaicin activates the heat receptor TRVP1, which is why chili feels hot even at room temperature. Menthol activates the cold receptor TRPM8, which is why mint feels cool. The chemical is speaking the language of the sensor, and the brain receives what sounds like temperature even when none is there. Your senses were always translating. The human nose can detect some odorant molecules at concentrations of a few parts per trillion, a sensitivity that would allow you to detect a single drop of certain substances dissolved into an Olympic swimming pool. But smell operates almost entirely outside conscious attention. The olfactory system begins processing odors before you are aware of smelling anything, and many olfactory signals never reach conscious perception at all. Research suggests that signals influencing social attraction are partly communicated through odor cues too subtle to consciously identify. Your body has been receiving information about the people around you through a channel you cannot read directly. It has been informing decisions below the threshold of awareness. The retina contains about 120 million rod cells, sensitive to low light levels and motion, and about 6 to 7 million cone cells concentrated in the central fovea. But the fovea, the small region of sharp, color vision where you look directly, covers only about 2 degrees of your visual field. Everything outside that small zone is peripheral vision, lower resolution, more sensitive to movement, and processed somewhat differently by the brain. When you move your eyes, which happens about 3 times per second in normal waking vision, the brain suppresses the visual blur that would otherwise occur during the rapid movement. You never see your own eyes move. The edit happens before the frame arrives. Synesthesia, the neurological condition in which stimulation of one sense automatically triggers an experience in another, affects an estimated 3 to 4% of the population, though milder forms may be much more common. The most frequent form is grapheme color synesthesia, in which letters and numbers reliably evoke specific colors. Some individuals experience music as color, or taste as shape, or numbers as having spatial positions. Brain imaging shows that in synesthetes, sensory processing areas that would normally remain segregated activate together. Rather than being a disorder, synesthesia may represent an extreme on a continuum of cross-sensory activation present to some degree in everyone. The senses have never been as separate as they seemed. Hearing in sleep does not switch off. The auditory system remains active throughout all sleep stages, continuously monitoring the environment for sounds that warrant a response. During non-REM sleep, the thalamus, which normally relays sensory signals to the cortex, begins to suppress incoming sensory information through sleep spindles, allowing deeper sleep to proceed. But this suppression is selective and incomplete. Loud sounds, your own name, the cry of an infant, or the specific sound of a door opening at an unusual time will still penetrate and trigger awakening or partial arousal. The sleeping brain is not absent from the world. It is keeping a lighter watch The relationship between smell and memory is so reliable that researchers have used it to reactivate specific memories during sleep. In studies where participants learned associations between objects and specific odors, and then were exposed to those odors during slow-wave sleep, memory consolidation for those paired items improved compared to items without an odor cue. The sleeping brain, still processing olfactory signals, appeared to selectively replay memories tagged by that scent. The mechanism likely involves the direct anatomical connection between the olfactory bulb and the hippocampus, the region central to forming and consolidating memories. Your nose was finding its way to things while you slept. The visual system devotes more cortical area to processing the center of the visual field than the periphery, a feature called cortical magnification. But this allocation is not fixed. Blind individuals who learn to read Braille show expanded somatosensory representation for the reading fingertip, and some develop cross-modal plasticity in which visual cortex areas become responsive to touch or sound. The brain's sensory maps are not architectural blueprints, but continuously negotiated territories. Use changes allocation. Silence in one channel can be filled by another. The nervous system is perpetually reorganizing the space it has, according to what it is currently receiving. Interoception, the sense of the body's internal state, includes the detection of heartbeat, hunger, thirst, temperature, fullness, breathlessness, and the general felt sense of being in a body. Research has shown that interoceptive signals are not merely background noise, but play a central role in decision-making, emotional processing, and the construction of the sense of self. Individuals with high interoceptive awareness, the ability to accurately perceive their own heartbeat, for example, tend to have stronger emotional responses and better emotional regulation. The felt experience of being a self is, in part, a sensory experience of being a body. The cocktail party effect describes the auditory system's ability to selectively attend to one conversation in a noisy environment while filtering out competing speech. This selective attention involves not just amplification of the attended signal, but active suppression of unattended signals. And the suppression happens before the signal fully reaches conscious awareness, as early as the auditory brainstem. Your name, however, breaks through even suppressed attention. The auditory system continues to monitor the unattended stream for personally significant signals, even while consciousness remains focused elsewhere. Some part of hearing is always on watch, even when you are certain you are not listening. Taste sensitivity changes dramatically across the lifespan. Children have taste buds not just on the tongue, but on the palate, tonsils, and upper throat, making them more sensitive to bitter compounds. A sensitivity that likely evolved to protect young children from ingesting toxins. This is why many children reject bitter vegetables that adults find acceptable. With age, taste bud density decreases and sensitivity declines, which partly explains why flavor preferences broaden. But the brain's expectations also change. What you predict a food will taste like influences what you taste. The same compound can taste different after a single strong associative experience. Positive or negative. Memory is already inside the flavor before you eat. Across these first 25 facts, a pattern has emerged worth pausing on. Every sense that science has examined turns out to be less a window and more a workshop. A place where raw data is turned into experience through layering, prediction, and active construction. Vision is mostly a prediction. Smell arrives at emotion before it reaches thought. Touch arrives in parallel channels calibrated for different kinds of contact. Pain is a decision, not a report. The senses do not deliver the world. They build an experience of it, using the world as raw material. The question this raises: what the construction process reveals about where experience actually lives, is where the next arc begins. The mind stories so far have been soft, and more are waiting just ahead. Perhaps this gentle space brings you comfort. A quiet subscribe helps another restless mind find it too. Now, breathe with us, one sleepy soul at a time. Right now, the signals traveling through your sensory nerves are slower than they were an hour ago. Not because the world went quiet, because your nervous system began dialing down the threshold of what it passes forward. The prediction engine is still running, still guessing at the next moment, but it is starting to guess in the direction of stillness. What fact 25 left open? The question of where experience actually lives, whether it is in the signal or in the construction, is not only a neuroscience question. You are carrying it right now, in the soft awareness of the room around you, in the heaviness of your eyelids, in the gentle pressure of the surface beneath you. Your nervous system is demonstrating its answer. Now we continue. The thalamus acts as the brain's sensory relay station, receiving input from most of the sensory organs and routing it to the appropriate cortical areas. But the thalamus is not a passive router. It actively gates sensory traffic based on the brain's current state of attention and arousal. During focused attention, thalamic neurons fire in tonic mode, allowing smooth, continuous transmission of sensory detail. During drowsiness and early sleep, they shift to bursting mode, which filters and breaks up incoming signals and generates the characteristic spindle rhythms of light sleep. The same gateway that sharpens perception when you are alert begins to soften it as the body moves toward rest. The rubber hand illusion demonstrates how easily the brain's body map can be updated. When a person watches a rubber hand being stroked, while their hidden real hand receives synchronous stroking, within minutes they begin to feel that the rubber hand is their hand, including feeling pain if the rubber hand is threatened. The brain resolves conflicting sensory signals by updating the body schema to incorporate the object receiving visible sensory input. This illusion works because the brain's priority is coherence, a consistent model, rather than accuracy. When a coherent model requires incorporating a rubber hand, the rubber hand gets incorporated. The body you feel yourself inhabiting is a model too. Phantom limb sensations, the experience of feeling a limb that has been amputated, occur in the large majority of people following limb loss. The cortical map for the missing limb remains intact after amputation and continues to generate sensations when neighboring regions activate and cross-activate into the unoccupied territory. Neuroscientist Vilayanur Ramachandran developed mirror box therapy, in which patients use a mirror to create the visual illusion of the missing limb moving. And this visual feedback can dramatically reduce phantom pain. demonstrating that the pain experience was being generated by the conflict between the cortical map and the absence of incoming signals. Providing false visual information resolved a real neurological conflict. The chemical senses, taste and smell, evolved primarily as threat detection systems, and this evolutionary origin shapes their character. Bitter and sour tastes trigger aversion because they often signal toxins or spoiled food. Rotten smells trigger disgust because the compounds that signal decomposition, cadaverine, putrescine, hydrogen sulfide, are genuinely associated with biological danger. These responses are partly innate and partly shaped by early experience. But the innate component is robust. Newborns show disgust responses to bitter tastes before any cultural conditioning could have occurred. The senses that reach deepest into emotion are the ones that evolved first as alarms. Beauty came later. The alarm came first. The vestibulo-ocular reflex allows the eyes to remain fixed on a target while the head is moving, by generating eye movements in the opposite direction to head rotation, within milliseconds. This reflex is so rapid, operating on a 3-neuron arc from vestibular organ to eye muscles, that it functions faster than voluntary eye movements. It runs continuously, mostly unnoticed, every time you move your head. When it fails, as it does in some inner ear disorders, the world appears to jump or blur with every head movement, revealing how much visual stability depends on this silent, constant correction happening in the background. Stillness is not the absence of motion. It is the result of continuous compensation. The olfactory system shows a phenomenon called olfactory adaptation. Continuous exposure to an odor causes a rapid decrease in perceived intensity, even though the odorant molecules continue to arrive. This adaptation happens at the receptor level. The receptor proteins become less responsive with sustained activation, and also centrally, as the brain learns to suppress a constant, unchanging signal as uninformative. This is why you stop noticing your own home's smell within minutes of arriving, while visitors detect it immediately. The nervous system is optimized for change detection, not baseline reporting. What doesn't change stops being reported. Only the new, the shifted, the different keeps reaching awareness. Research on congenitally blind individuals who have their sight surgically restored in adulthood reveals the extent to which visual perception is learned rather than innate. These individuals can immediately detect light and motion, but cannot recognize faces. Identify three-dimensional objects by sight alone, or perceive depth from visual cues. The brain, having organized itself without visual input during the critical developmental period, has assigned those cortical areas to other functions. Learning to see as an adult is slow, partial, and sometimes frustrating, demonstrating that the experience of seeing a face as a face requires years of visual learning that most people complete without ever knowing it happened. The sense of time, duration perception, is not a dedicated sensory system, but an emergent property of how the brain processes events. Attention is one key variable. Time feels slower when you are bored or waiting because the brain is producing more internal ticks, checking the clock more frequently. And time feels faster when you are absorbed because fewer internal checks occur. Temperature also affects time perception. Warmer internal body temperature tends to speed up subjective time. Emotionally intense or frightening events seem to last longer in memory, partly because the amygdala's involvement triggers denser encoding of the experience. You were never counting time. The brain was approximating it. Skin conductance. The electrical conductivity of the skin, which increases with sweat gland activity, changes in response to emotional and cognitive events that the person may not consciously register. The polygraph test is based on this principle, though its reliability for detecting deception is disputed. What is clearer is that skin conductance responds to stimuli below the threshold of conscious perception. Images flashed too briefly to be consciously seen. Sounds too quiet to be consciously heard. Words embedded in noise. The body responds before the mind arrives. The skin has been keeping score of things you haven't noticed yet. Echolocation. The use of reflected sound to perceive spatial environments is not exclusive to bats. Some blind humans develop highly proficient echolocation by producing clicking sounds with the tongue and interpreting the returning echoes to navigate, identify objects, and even ride bicycles. Brain imaging of proficient echolocators shows that they use the visual cortex to process echo information, not the auditory cortex. The brain, deprived of visual input, has repurposed the region built for spatial vision to process the spatial information arriving through sound. The brain is not loyal to the format of the information. It is loyal to what the information is for. The pain system has a descending component. Nerve pathways that run from the brain downward to the spinal cord and can amplify or suppress incoming pain signals before they reach consciousness. This descending modulation is why placebo treatments can produce genuine pain relief. Believing a treatment is effective activates descending inhibitory pathways that reduce pain signal transmission at the spinal level. The effect is measurable in both subjective report and neural activity. Expectation is not merely influencing the experience of pain from above. It is chemically reducing the signal at the point of entry. The brain was always editing before you knew the chapter had started. Some research suggests proprioceptive signals from the muscles and joints play a role in regulating emotional state. Studies have found that adopting expansive body postures, open chest, relaxed limbs, space-occupying positions, produces measurable changes in physiological arousal and self-reported calm. Conversely, contracted, curled postures are associated with self-reported anxiety and threat. The direction of causation may run in both directions. Emotion shapes posture, and posture shapes emotion, through pathways that include proprioceptive feedback to the insula and brainstem. The position of your body right now, the weight of your limbs, the openness of your chest, is already a signal being read by the same system that generates how you feel. Auditory processing shows notable plasticity across the lifespan, but the changes are not always in the direction of decline. Musicians who have trained extensively show enlarged auditory cortical representation for the frequencies of their instruments, finer pitch discrimination, and faster neural responses to sound. These structural changes persist into older age and may protect against some aspects of age-related hearing decline. The auditory cortex, like other sensory areas, reshapes itself in proportion to what it processes. Decades of careful listening build a different neural architecture than decades of casual hearing. The ear is the same instrument. The brain that reads it has been written by use. The experience of being touched and the experience of seeing someone else being touched activate overlapping regions of the somatosensory cortex, a phenomenon with implications for empathy and social connection. Some individuals, mirror touch synesthetes, experience actual tactile sensations in their own body when they observe another person being touched. Brain imaging in non-synesthetic individuals shows partial activation of somatosensory regions in response to observed touch, suggesting that the boundary between self-experience and other observation is permeable at the neural level. The experience of witnessing someone else's sensation is not only cognitive. Something in the touch system responds even when the touch lands on someone else. The brain continuously constructs a body schema, an internal model of the body's shape, size, boundaries, and position in space, that updates with sensory input but can be modified by expectation and context. In environments like zero gravity, the body schema begins to drift within hours as the expected relationship between proprioception, vision, and vestibular signals breaks down. Astronauts report periods of spatial disorientation and difficulty locating limbs in darkness during the early days of spaceflight. The body schema restores as the brain learns the new rules of the environment. The experience of having a body is a model that runs on updated data. Change the data, and the model updates too. You've been listening for a while now. Thoughts still flickering like candlelight. Just notice. Don't judge. Just notice where your mind is. We're exploring consciousness itself, the very thing doing the exploring right now. Strange, beautiful, and perfectly calm. Let's drift onward together. During REM sleep, sensory processing undergoes a distinctive transformation. External sensory signals continue to arrive at the thalamus, but most are blocked from reaching the cortex by thalamic gating. Meanwhile, the cortex becomes highly active, generating internal signals that sensory and motor areas process as if they were real. Vision is simulated. Proprioception is simulated. And the motor system activates while the body remains paralyzed by active inhibition of motor neurons in the brainstem. The dreaming brain runs the sensory construction process at full speed, but entirely on internally generated input. What you see in a dream is not less vivid. It is more coherent because nothing external is interrupting. The sense of balance can be disrupted not only by inner ear damage, but by conflicting information from different sensory channels. In poor visibility, fog, darkness, underwater, the vestibular system must carry more of the balance task alone, and errors are more likely. Pilots flying in clouds without instruments lose accurate orientation within minutes because visual cues have been removed and the vestibular system alone cannot distinguish certain types of rotation. Instrument training teaches pilots to trust instruments over their felt sense of position, a discipline that runs counter to every instinct, because the felt sense of tipping is very convincing. What the body insists it feels is not always what the body is doing. Taste perception is modulated by the trigeminal nerve, which is responsible for the sensation of spiciness, carbonation, and the cooling of menthol. These are not true taste sensations. The trigeminal nerve detects irritation and temperature rather than chemical flavor, but they integrate seamlessly with taste and smell to create the composite experience of eating. This is why carbonated water tastes different from still water, even at the same temperature and mineral content. The carbonation activates trigeminal pain and touch receptors on the tongue, adding a sharp, slightly acidic character that flat water lacks. The flavor of food is assembled from at least 3 separate sensory channels simultaneously, and you experience only the finished product. The auditory brainstem response. The electrical signal generated by the brainstem within the first 10 milliseconds of sound arrival reflects the health of the auditory pathway from cochlea to brainstem. Researchers found that musicians show more precise brainstem responses to sounds than non-musicians, including faster neural timing and more accurate encoding of pitch. This subcortical sharpening suggests that musical training affects not just the cortical regions traditionally associated with learning, but the very earliest stages of auditory processing, stages that operate below conscious control. The practice accumulated over years is written into the foundations of the auditory system, not just its upper floors. The McGurk effect, in which lip movements override heard sound, is resistant to knowledge and attention. Even after being told about the illusion, shown the illusion, and consciously monitoring for it, most people continue to experience the auditory effect produced by the conflicting visual input. This persistence reveals something about the architecture of multisensory integration. The combination of visual and auditory signals happens early in processing, before the output reaches conscious awareness or deliberate attention. You cannot decide not to be affected by what you see when you listen. The integration happens before you arrive at the decision point. Consciousness receives the finished construction, not the raw materials. Sensory processing sensitivity, a trait characterized by deeper processing of sensory and social information, greater responsiveness to subtle stimuli, and stronger emotional responses, has been identified in roughly 15 to 20% of humans and in numerous animal species. In humans, highly sensitive individuals show greater activation of brain regions associated with attention, awareness, and action planning in response to sensory stimuli, and greater activation of social and empathy-related regions in response to emotional images. The trait appears to be a stable individual difference with a genetic component, representing a distinct processing strategy rather than a disorder. The nervous system can be tuned to different depths of engagement with what arrives. The experience of chills in response to music, sometimes called frisson, occurs in roughly 50 to 70% of people, though the frequency and intensity varies considerably. The auditory system's connection to the amygdala and nucleus accumbens, regions involved in reward, emotion, and anticipation, means that music can activate the same neural circuitry as other rewarding stimuli. Frisson appears to be related to the emotional salience of a moment of musical surprise or resolution, and may be associated with trait openness to experience. Some ears are built to let music reach farther. What arrives through the auditory cortex can travel all the way to reward. The 2 cerebral hemispheres process sensory information with some degree of specialization. The right hemisphere is generally more dominant for processing spatial information, emotional tone in voices, global visual patterns, and the prosody of speech. The rhythm, stress, and intonation that carry meaning beyond the words themselves. The left hemisphere tends to be more dominant for fine-grained sequential processing, including the individual phonemes of speech and the details of written language. These are tendencies, not absolute divisions, and the hemispheres communicate continuously via the corpus callosum. But the way a voice makes you feel and the words that voice is saying are, to some degree, processed by different parts of the same brain. Sensory gating. The brain's ability to reduce neural responses to repeated, redundant stimuli is disrupted in several conditions, including schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder. In individuals with intact sensory gating, a second presentation of a stimulus shortly after the first produces a reduced neural response. As the brain filters out the repetition as uninformative, in individuals with disrupted gating, the second stimulus produces nearly the same response as the first, suggesting the normal suppression of redundant input is not functioning. This may contribute to sensory overload, difficulty filtering irrelevant stimuli, and the intrusive re-experiencing of memories as if occurring in the present. The gate that keeps the world at a manageable volume is itself a kind of protection. 50 facts in, the picture that has emerged is this: the senses are not channels that bring the world to you. They are interfaces that construct a working model, always slightly interpreted, always calibrated to attention and prior experience. And here is what that leaves open. If every experience is a construction, if the world you move through is always a model built on signals you never directly touch, then the question of where the boundary between you and the world actually lies remains genuinely unsettled. That is the question the second half of this hour follows. The senses have taken us to the edge of something deeper than where we started. What just opened? The question of where the self ends and the world begins. Given that every experience of the world is constructed inside a nervous system, is not only a neuroscience question. You may be carrying a version of it right now. The uncertainty of whether what you feel is real, or constructed, or both. That is not an error in the system. That is the system working at full depth. Notice the weight of the surface beneath you. That sensation is also a construction. It is also real. Both can be true. The second half of tonight follows the space where they meet. Now we continue. The insular cortex, folded deep within the lateral sulcus of the brain, serves as a primary integration hub for interoceptive signals from the body. It receives input from the heart, lungs, gut, skin, and muscles, and participates in generating conscious emotional experience. Pain, disgust, empathy, and the sense of bodily self. When interoceptive signals are disrupted, as occurs in alexithymia, where individuals have difficulty identifying their own emotional states, the insular cortex shows altered activity. Feeling yourself is not a given. It is a process. The enteric nervous system, a network of roughly 100 to 500 million neurons embedded in the gastrointestinal tract, can regulate digestive activity independently of the brain. It also communicates bidirectionally with the central nervous system via the vagus nerve. Research has established that gut-brain signaling influences mood, anxiety, and cognitive function, and that the gut microbiome can modulate these signals by producing neurotransmitter precursors and immune signaling molecules. What the gut reports is received by the brain in language that shapes how you feel. The somatosensory cortex is organized in a distorted map of the body surface called the sensory homunculus, in which the lips, tongue, and hands take up far more cortical real estate than the back or legs. This distortion reflects the density of sensory innervation and the precision required for fine manipulation and communication. If the human body was sculpted to reflect this map, the result would be a creature with enormous hands and lips, and a tiny torso. The brain maps what it uses. Noise-induced hearing loss affects the mechanical hair cells of the cochlea, which are not regenerated in mammals once damaged. In humans, chronic exposure to sounds above 85 decibels causes progressive, permanent loss, typically beginning with the high frequencies used for consonant discrimination in speech. This loss often goes unnoticed for years because the brain compensates by relying more heavily on context and expectation to fill in missing phonemes. The world sounds normal because the brain is filling the gaps. The damage is already there before the silence arrives. The phenomenon of sensory substitution demonstrates that the brain can learn to process information about one kind of environmental feature through a sensory channel not originally designed for it. Devices that convert visual information into tactile patterns on the skin or auditory patterns through earphones allow trained individuals to navigate spaces and recognize faces. Blind individuals using auditory substitution show visual cortex activation while using the device. The brain does not care which pipe the information arrives through. It cares about what the information means. The vestibular system has a direct connection to the vagus nerve and the autonomic nervous system, which is why inner ear disturbances can produce changes in heart rate, blood pressure, and sweating, the rocking motions that humans instinctively use to soothe infants and themselves. Rhythmic body movement, the sway of a hammock, activate vestibular inputs in patterns that have a calming effect on the autonomic nervous system. The nervous system evolved in a world of natural motion. The body still reads rhythmic movement as a signal of safety. Stillness is learned. The rocking was there first. Synesthetic color associations for letters and numbers tend to be consistent with individuals across time. Someone who sees the letter A as red in their 20s will likely still see it as red in their 60s. The associations are also partially consistent across synesthetes. In English, A is most commonly reported as red, O as white or black. This cross-individual clustering suggests the associations are influenced by statistical regularities in language, perhaps the frequency or visual form of the letters. The senses are shaped not just by individual experience, but by the shared patterns of the language that organized perception since childhood. Pain tolerance varies significantly between individuals, influenced by genetic, psychological, and social factors. Certain gene variants affecting opioid receptor sensitivity alter the baseline level of pain signaling in the nervous system. Psychological factors, including catastrophizing, reliably amplify pain experience, while mindfulness practices that reduce attentional focus on pain signals consistently reduce it. The presence of a trusted companion during painful procedures reduces rated pain intensity and activates endogenous opioid pathways. The social world is always part of the sensory experience. You are never feeling it alone. The auditory system processes music using overlapping but distinct networks, depending on the type of musical feature being analyzed. Rhythm processing engages the basal ganglia and supplementary motor area, regions also involved in movement, which is why rhythmic music triggers involuntary body movement and why musical rhythm can be used to entrain movement in rehabilitation of motor disorders like Parkinson's disease. Melody processing engages right hemisphere auditory association areas. The experience of listening to music is distributed across the entire brain, threading together motor, emotional, and auditory processing simultaneously. Music uses nearly all of the brain at once. The sense of smell undergoes a characteristic decline beginning in middle age. Reduced smell sensitivity is one of the earliest detectable signs of several neurodegenerative conditions, including Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, because the olfactory system, with its direct connections to the entorhinal cortex and hippocampus, is among the first regions affected. The loss of smell often precedes motor symptoms in Parkinson's and cognitive symptoms in Alzheimer's by years. The nose, with its direct route to memory and emotion, is also an early warning system for what changes in the deepest structures of the mind. Cross-modal plasticity, the reorganization of sensory cortex in response to sensory deprivation, begins within hours of deprivation onset. In experiments where sighted individuals were blindfolded for as few as 5 days, the visual cortex began showing activation in response to tactile stimulation of the fingertips by the 4th or 5th day. When the blindfold was removed, the cross-modal activation disappeared within 24 hours. The brain's sensory territories are not fixed leases. They are continuously negotiated. Deprivation creates vacancy. The neighboring systems move in. Recovery removes the tenant. The arrangement is always provisional. The sense of agency, the felt sense that you are the author of your own actions, has a sensory component. Research on the brain readiness potential has found that electrical activity preceding voluntary movement begins several hundred milliseconds before the person reports becoming consciously aware of the intention to move. This timing suggests that the sense of being the one who decided is constructed after the preparation has already begun, like a narrator describing a journey already in progress. The sound of your own voice, as you hear it from inside your head, is different from how it sounds on a recording. The internal experience includes bone conduction, vibrations traveling through the skull to the cochlea, which adds lower frequency components that give the internal voice a fullness that microphones don't capture. The voice you have heard all your life, the one you recognize as yours, is a sensory construction that no one else has ever heard. You have been hearing a version of yourself that exists only for you. Tactile acuity, the fineness of touch discrimination on the skin, can be improved with training. And this improvement is accompanied by changes in the somatosensory cortex. In experiments where participants were trained to discriminate between closely spaced tactile stimuli on a fingertip, both their discrimination threshold and the cortical representation of that fingertip expanded. This targeted plasticity means that the precision of touch at any given location reflects the accumulated history of that location's use. A craftsperson's hands carry a different somatosensory map than someone who does not work with them. The hands know what they have practiced. The perception of beauty in faces, music, landscapes, and art involves sensory processing, but extends well beyond the primary sensory areas into regions associated with reward, memory, and self-relevance. Brain imaging studies have consistently identified the medial orbitofrontal cortex as a region whose activation correlates with the rated beauty of a stimulus across different sensory modalities. This suggests the brain has a domain general beauty evaluation system that receives input from multiple senses. Beauty is not a property of the sensory signal. It is an evaluation performed downstream, using sensory input as one ingredient among many. Taste aversion, a strong, enduring avoidance of a food that was followed by nausea, is one of the most robust forms of associative learning, and it can form in a single trial with a delay of up to several hours between taste and nausea. This rate of learning is unusual compared to most conditioned responses, which require multiple pairings. The evolutionary logic is clear. In a world where testing an unfamiliar food might produce delayed poisoning, a one-trial system with a long association window protects against repeated exposure to the same source. The body remembers the meal that hurt once. The visual system has a blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve exits the retina and there are no photoreceptors. You are ordinarily unaware of this gap because the brain fills it seamlessly using surrounding information and context. But the blind spot can be demonstrated simply. Close one eye, fixate on a point, and move a small object into the right position, and it disappears. The world you see is already patched. The seam is invisible, not because it was repaired, but because it was never visible to begin with. The completeness of what you see was always the brain's own addition. Skin-to-skin contact in newborns activates the C-tactile afferent system and has measurable effects on heart rate regulation, cortisol levels, and brain development. Research on premature infants receiving kangaroo care shows lower rates of infection, faster weight gain, improved sleep architecture, and better developmental outcomes compared to incubator-only care. The effects appear to be mediated, at least in part, by the oxytocin system, which is activated by gentle touch through C-tactile pathways. The most foundational calming system in the human nervous system is activated by the simplest possible input. Slow, warm, gentle contact. Nothing required except skin and proximity and time. The experience of time slowing during a life-threatening event is a reliable, subjective report that has been studied experimentally. Research found that while people retrospectively believe they experience time more slowly during a frightening event, they do not actually perceive events with greater temporal resolution in the moment. The apparent slow-motion replay is a memory effect. Heightened amygdala activation during fear causes denser encoding of sensory details, and the richness of the memory creates the impression of expanded duration when recalled. The past feels long because it was recorded carefully. The moment itself moved at normal speed. The perception of food texture involves not just the tactile receptors in the tongue and gums, but the auditory system. The sound of crunching contributes to the perceived crunchiness of a food. And studies have shown that degrading the acoustic quality of eating sounds reduces the perceived freshness and crunchiness of foods like crisps. This auditory contribution to texture perception is a form of multisensory integration, so embedded that most people are unaware it is occurring. The way food feels is partly how it sounds. The senses collaborate without announcing the collaboration. The olfactory bulb is one of the few regions of the adult brain where neurogenesis, the generation of new neurons, continues throughout the lifespan. New neurons born in the subventricular zone migrate to the olfactory bulb, where they are incorporated into existing circuits. The rate of this neurogenesis appears to respond to sensory experience. Odor-rich environments increase cell survival, while sensory deprivation reduces it. Though the functional significance in humans remains under active investigation, it places the olfactory system among a select group of neural structures that continue to rebuild themselves in response to what they receive. Research in neonates demonstrates that newborn humans can distinguish their mother's voice from other female voices within hours of birth, having been exposed to it through the womb wall during the final months of pregnancy. They show a preference for the rhythmic patterns of their native language and can recognize specific stories read to them repeatedly during the third trimester. This prenatal auditory learning suggests the auditory system is functional and capable of forming preferences well before birth. The acoustic environment of the womb, muffled, rhythmic, dominated by the mother's voice, shapes the initial baseline of what sounds familiar and safe. The phenomenon of sensory leakage in meditation, the intrusion of sights, sounds, and bodily sensations into meditative states, is not a failure of attention, but a demonstration of the default activity level of sensory cortices in the absence of sustained external input. Long-term meditators show a different pattern. Greater initial neural response to sensory stimuli, followed by faster habituation and return to baseline. The trained meditator notices more, but returns faster. Awareness without attachment is a measurable neural state. The sense of touch is the first sense to develop in the human embryo, with tactile responses observed around the mouth by approximately 8 weeks of gestation. By 17 weeks, the entire body surface is responsive to touch. This developmental sequence suggests that touch is the foundational sense, the one that precedes all others. There is a continuity from the earliest tactile experience in the womb to the final calming presence of gentle contact in old age. The first language the body learned was touch. It remains the deepest one. After 75 facts, the picture that has completed itself is this. The senses do not deliver experience. They provide the raw material from which a nervous system constructs one. And that construction is not a diminished version of reality. It is the only version any nervous system has ever had. What your senses hand you is not less than the world. It is a world, assembled continuously, from signals you never directly touch, refined over hundreds of millions of years. The remaining facts carry a different quality. They belong not to the mechanism, but to what the mechanism has made possible. You might be feeling tired now. That's perfectly fine. Breathe slowly. Consider that the breath you just took was a sensory event. Pressure on the chest wall, temperature change at the nostrils, the stretch of the diaphragm, and all of it was processed, translated, and handed to you as the simple, wordless experience of breathing, something that has happened many thousands of times today. Each one assembled quietly in the background. Each one felt as immediate as the first. You don't need to hold on to anything. Let the facts settle. Let the constructions rest. We're almost there now. The senses are not only how you receive the world, they are how the world stays with you. Every memory that returns carries its sensory texture, the quality of light, the sound of a voice, the temperature of a room. The senses are the format that memory uses to store what mattered. What you remember most clearly is what you felt most fully. Smell is the sense most resistant to verbal description. People can recognize thousands of odors with ease, but have difficulty naming them without a visual or contextual cue. This language gap may reflect the olfactory system's pre-verbal evolutionary origin. Smell arrived before language. It has never needed words. It communicates directly, in associations and emotions, bypassing the naming step. It reaches you in a register that language comes to late and leaves early. The skin remembers. Areas repeatedly subjected to physical pressure thicken and form calluses, the skin adapting its structure to the sensory demands placed on it. The fingertips of experienced guitarists, the palms of climbers, the heels of barefoot walkers carry the history of use in their texture. What you have touched has left its trace on you, in the very surface that did the touching. The ear contains the smallest bones in the human body, the malleus, incus, and stapes, 3 ossicles spanning roughly 3 millimeters. These bones have existed in their current form for approximately 165 million years. Having migrated from the jaw joint of early mammalian ancestors over an evolutionary transition documented in the fossil record. The smallest, most delicate structures in the body carry the longest evolutionary history. They were built for survival over vast time. Now they carry music. Darkness is not the absence of vision. It is a visual experience the brain generates without sufficient light. The retina, without incoming photons, does not go quiet. It produces spontaneous neural activity that the brain interprets as visual darkness. When you close your eyes in a quiet room, the visual system is still running, producing what some researchers have called Eigengrau, the intrinsic gray of the visual field. Even without the world, the eyes are still making something of the dark. Hunger and thirst are interoceptive signals generated by the body's monitoring of its internal chemical environment. The hypothalamus tracks blood glucose levels and hormone signals like leptin and ghrelin. But these signals are easily overridden by sensory input. The smell of food, the sight of an appetizing meal, the sound of something cooking. All can trigger appetite responses independent of metabolic state. The body knows what it needs. The senses decide what you want. They do not always agree. The auditory system detects the emotional content of a voice faster than the brain decodes its words. The paralinguistic features of speech, pitch, rhythm, tempo, intensity, are processed by auditory regions with faster pathways to emotional centers than those that decode semantic content. You feel whether a voice is kind or threatening before you understand what it is saying. The tone is the first message. The words are commentary on a judgment already made. The skin produces its own endocannabinoids, lipid molecules that reduce pain signaling through peripheral receptors. These compounds are part of a broader system of endogenous analgesics that includes endorphins and enkephalins. all produced within the body in response to physical and emotional signals. The body has been manufacturing its own comfort for the entirety of its existence. What the body does in quiet moments, when the pain is not overwhelming, is produce the chemistry of ease on its own. Color perception shifts toward the blue end of the spectrum in dim light, a shift called the Purkinje effect. At low light levels, the rod cells, most sensitive to blue-green wavelengths, take over from the cone cells. A red flower and a blue flower that appear equally vivid in daylight will, at dusk, look different. The blue lighter, the red darker. As the light fades, the world quietly shifts its palette. You have always been seeing a version that depends on the light. The brain devotes more neural resources and responds with faster reaction times to cold stimuli than to warm stimuli of equivalent intensity. This asymmetry likely reflects the greater threat posed by cold. Exposure to cold is acutely life-threatening in a way that mild warmth is not. The system that monitors the body's thermal state is biased toward catching the dangerous end of the spectrum. Warmth is safe enough to process slowly. Cold needs an answer now. Cross-cultural studies of emotional responses to music have found that even individuals from small, isolated communities with no prior exposure to Western music show consistent emotional responses to certain tempo and mode features. Fast tempo and major mode tend to be perceived as positive or energetic across cultures, slow tempo and minor mode as tender or sad. There appears to be a biological scaffold for the emotional language of music that culture builds upon, but does not build from scratch. The scaffold was there before the song. The sense of smell contributes to infant-caregiver bonding through bidirectional recognition. Newborns can identify their mother's body odor within days of birth. Mothers can identify their newborn's unique body odor within hours, with accuracy that does not depend on the amount of prior contact. The first recognition between a mother and child is not visual. It moves through something older and quieter than sight. It arrives before the eyes have learned their work. The resting visual cortex does not go quiet. It continues to generate spontaneous, patterned activity in the absence of visual input, organized into the same functional networks that activate during active visual processing. When a person lies in darkness with eyes closed, the visual cortex shows structured, correlated activity across regions that process color, motion, and spatial arrangement. This background activity may contribute to visual imagery, dreams, and memory recall. The dark is just a pause between pictures. Visceral pain from the internal organs, is diffuse, poorly localized, and often referred to surface locations far from the actual source. Heart attack pain frequently radiates to the left arm and jaw. Diaphragm irritation is felt in the shoulder. The brain maps visceral pain onto body surface locations because the internal organs are underrepresented in the cortical body map. The brain uses the closest well-mapped surface as a reference. The body sends you to the wrong address because the right address has no name. True absence of sound, anechoic chamber conditions, produces awareness of internal bodily sounds. Heartbeat, blood flow, the soft sounds of swallowing. As ambient sound decreases, the auditory system increases its sensitivity to maintain signal detection, and the internal sounds of the body begin to register. Many people find this deeply uncomfortable. Silence is not the neutral state the word suggests. It is a heightened listening directed inward. The ears have nowhere quiet to rest. The sense of touch is the last major sense to decline at the end of life. Vision and hearing typically show significant deterioration in the final decades. But sensitivity to gentle, affectionate touch through C-tactile afferent pathways appears more preserved. This may reflect the foundational importance of this system, the one that signals safety, belonging, and calm throughout the lifespan. The first language the body learned is also the one it keeps the longest. The olfactory system generates a continuous, mostly background processed representation of the chemical environment. This representation changes gradually across the day as indoor and outdoor air compositions shift. Most of these changes never reach conscious perception. They contribute, instead, to a diffuse sense of place and time and familiarity. The smell of morning is different from the smell of night, and the nervous system knows the difference even when you do not. The nose knows what hour it is. Taste and smell integrate in the orbitofrontal cortex to produce the experience of flavor. But this region also incorporates information about the current state of hunger and satisfaction. The same food activates the orbitofrontal cortex more strongly when the person is hungry than when satiated. What tastes extraordinary when you are hungry tastes merely adequate when you are full. The senses are always reporting on the world in relation to the body's state. What is delicious is partly a statement about what you need. The brain's spatial map of the auditory world is recalibrated whenever it produces errors. Research has shown that wearing an earplug that alters the acoustic relationship between the ears causes the brain to gradually update its spatial map over days, so that sounds are again heard as correctly located. When the plug is removed, the old calibration returns. The brain's sensory maps are maintained through continuous checking of predictions against outcomes. The world is the test that the senses run continuously. The weight of the world, as received by the senses, is always a personal version. The same sunset is received by different retinas, routed through visual cortices shaped by different histories, evaluated against memory stores of every previous sunset seen or described. The same music arrives in ears of different sensitivity, into emotional centers carrying different associations. No two nervous systems have ever received the same world. You have always been the only one who saw exactly this. During the descent into sleep, sensory processing does not shut down uniformly. The first senses to withdraw are vision and proprioception. The closed eyes and the relaxing muscles signal that external monitoring is no longer needed. Touch sensitivity persists longer, as do auditory responses to personally significant sounds. The last sensory thread before full sleep onset is often auditory, a faint awareness of ambient sound that dissolves with the final descent. The ears close last. They are the last ones to trust the dark. The experience of waking, the return of sensory awareness from sleep, is not a switch, but a gradient. Consciousness reassembles itself in reverse order from the way it departed. Auditory awareness returns before visual, proprioception before full spatial orientation, self-recognition before contextual awareness. In that brief window between sleep and full waking, the senses come back online in sequence, handing you a world that is partial, approximate, assembling itself piece by piece into the room you are in. The word sense shares its origin with the Latin sentire, to feel, to perceive, to experience. And this etymology points to something the science has confirmed from many directions, that sensing and feeling are not separable. Every piece of sensory information arrives already threaded through with evaluation, context, and the body's current state. The senses are not neutral. They were built by a nervous system that needs to survive, to belong, to rest. Every signal they carry was always also a question about whether you are safe. The silence that gradually descends across a night of rest is itself a sensory event. The decreasing arrival of sound signals, the settling of the vestibular system, the reduction of interoceptive noise as the body's demands quiet. This convergence of sensory quieting is not the absence of experience. It is the experience of safety. The nervous system has a name for the configuration of sensory inputs that means no threat is present. It is called calm. It is called rest. The answer to the question this hour began with is this. The brain weaves incoming sensory signals into a world you are still inside, the same way it has always done everything. With the material available, with the tools it inherited, with a preference for coherence over accuracy. And what it builds is not a map of the world. It is a home in it. The senses were never a window. They were always the walls. The answer is that you are already inside it. 100 facts ago, we were asking how sensation becomes experience. The answer moves in only one direction. Through you. Every signal arrived already altered by the prediction the brain made before it came, by the history in the cortex that received it. We followed sound through the brainstem, light through a visual world that is mostly a guess, touch through tactile fibers to the chemistry of calm. What began as a question about mechanics became a recognition. The senses don't show you the world. They show you what the world is like for a nervous system that needs to rest. What you carry now is this. The world you inhabit was never given to you. It was built continuously, from the inside out. And the one who built it never asked for credit. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can, as deep as possible. Think about consciousness itself. Yours, mine, everyone listening. All awareness everywhere, perhaps all connected in ways we don't yet understand. You are not alone in the universe of minds. Let your entire being dissolve into the ocean of consciousness, into dreamless rest, into the space before thought. Prepare for deep sleep. No boundaries left. Only peace. Tonight, the science of your senses carried you through something quiet and worth knowing. A gentle like. Subscribe or share helps another restless mind find this space when they need it most. One quiet tap, one sleepy soul at a time. You've traveled far tonight. You can allow these thoughts of sensation and perception to fade now, like signals that have been processed and filed, leaving only the quiet coherence behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier. as if the sensory cortex has finally stopped asking what everything means and simply settled into the weight of being still. If sleep comes, let it carry you like the last signal before the switch, smoothly, inevitably, into a place where time and weight no longer matter. Sleep science has been building this particular hour across many evenings, assembling the question of how sensation becomes experience from dozens of different angles. The next hour follows the part of that question this one didn't have time to finish. That hour is waiting whenever you are ready. But if your eyes are closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, the senses will return to their work. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, curious one. And remember, the world your senses hand you is not a window onto something beyond reach. It is a home, already built, already yours, where curiosity ends and sleep begins. Good night.